Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to briefly discuss how the COVID inquiry has yet again highlighted the damage of not only Brexit, but Brexit ideology as evidence given today, not for the first time and it won't be the last, shows how our pandemic response suffered. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, a number of government failures are going to emerge from the COVID inquiry. Indeed, a number already are. In many ways, the Tories made such a mess of things, individual failures could get lost in the crowd. It's one of the themes I always say when I'm talking about, when the Conservatives might have the general election, if they're really going to push into next year, and I think they are, then this is one of the things that basically says to them, are you insane? Because the longer this goes on, the longer they delay, the more things are going to come out of this COVID inquiry. But there is multiple threads, but there's one thread emerging and will continue to do so. And it's how the government failed to do its job properly because it was wrangling with Brexit. Specifically, it was wrangling with the twin aims of pursuing a hard Brexit, that is one outside the single market and customs union, in a way that didn't seem as completely insane as it has actually turned out to be. Being honest, never mind the vacuous oaths that we had at the top of government driving this policy through, even an intelligent and competent cabinet would not have been able to go through with the hard Brexit and make it sound plausible. In fact, it has been said before, not least by myself, that the reason we had vacuous oaths at the top of government is because they are the only people who could bring themselves to go ahead with a hard Brexit. So, we used to have a pandemic response unit, for example. I mean, I've said many times before that the Tory government understood that the number one threat to the nation was a global pandemic for a full decade before it hit. Not just that they knew what was coming. It's not just that they knew a global pandemic was going to happen at some point, but that it was the greatest threat to the nation. It was classed as the number one threat to the nation. More serious than war in Europe. More serious than terrorism. Way more serious than small boats in the Channel. As a result, we had Operation Cygnus to work out what we should do to prepare. There was an acknowledgement from David Cameron, we're not prepared, we need to get busy with this. Okay, fine. The recommendations were left largely untouched. We built a pandemic response team. That would have been handy when COVID hit, wouldn't it? Unfortunately, Theresa May's government didn't really develop it because they were focused on Brexit. And then Boris Johnson cancelled it altogether just before COVID hit. Right. In fact, this is what historians are going to write as the epithet on the tombstone of this period of Conservative government: was too busy arguing about Brexit. We know that there are destructive policies which the Tories have in general, but the particular period of abject failure over the past few years is down to not simply Conservative thinking being unfit for purpose during an emergency, but allowing Brexit and this concept of Brexit purity to override all their other thinking. Today's latest instalment from the public hearings of the COVID inquiry involved the Health Secretary at the time, Matt Hancock, pretending that he regrets the harm he caused during the key phases of the pandemic, both in preparation and implementation of the response. Remember, Matt Hancock was the Health Secretary who also should have been getting our preparations for the pandemic in place, not just carrying it out when it hit. And there's a chart doing the rounds on social media. It's a risk assessment, and it includes major infectious diseases being flagged as red, in other words, top priority. However, absolutely nothing written in the mitigations boxes. Now, for those who've never been involved in preparing risk assessments, you evaluate risk, you consider how serious the consequences would be, how likely certain scenarios are. So something that is a very high risk is likely to be something that is both likely to happen in the foreseeable future and would result in very serious consequences, usually the loss of life on a grand scale. Well, like I say, the government have recognised a global pandemic as just such a threat. So when you prepare your risk assessment, if the risk is above a certain level, and you know what, Code Red is above that level, you are expected to mitigate that risk. You come up with ways which either reduce the chance of the threat being realised, or you put something in place to reduce the harm caused if it happens. For example, radiographers are not in the room with the patient when an x-ray's been taken to hospital. You're a patient, you're having an x-ray like a few times in your life, you're exposed to a certain level of radiation. The radiographer, if they were holding your hand, would be exposed to it all day, every day. No. Too risky. So they retreat to a bunker to put a good amount of concrete between themselves and the source of radiation. That is an example of a mitigation. Not a sausage is mentioned in the mitigations boxes on this risk assessment of the most serious threat to the nation. This thing, number one threat to the nation. Oh, should we do something about it? Well, the boxes say no, nothing in it. And it was Matt Hancock's responsibility. But more importantly, it was caused because resources were diverted away from the important work of government and into the single greatest act of self-harm a country ever committed since the people of Troy thought it was a good idea to accept a big wooden horse from a country they were at war with. And this isn't just me inferring things here, reading between the lines. Oh, a bad thing happened, must be Brexit. Matt Hancock told the committee today that pandemic preparations were paused in 2018 and 2019 because of Brexit. Specifically because of the threat of, in his own words, a disorganised Brexit. Now, I'm not suggesting that without Brexit the Tories would have handled the pandemic marvellously. Their austerity still cut back our critical care provision, for example. I cannot imagine they'd have built that back up. But there was an intention to prepare ourselves for a global pandemic. The Tory government intended to do that. They held a review, they had recommendations, and then the preparations were halted so that they could focus on Brexit. And this is according to the Health Secretary at the time. Interestingly, Matt Hancock did in the past say that he could not guarantee that Brexit would not kill people. Well, it seems to have taken quite a lot of victims now, hasn't it? We would still have had COVID deaths, of course. You know, every country did. The government may have been hamstrung by austerity still, and maybe even a useless leader. We don't know who would have been charged. But if they had a plan prepared in advance, as it seems they would have done, were it not for Brexit, then at least we would have had a coordinated and confident public messaging system. We would certainly have had a pandemic response team. It would have saved a lot of lives which have now been lost. After all, it's inconceivable to suggest that preparations for the pandemic wouldn't have saved a great many lives. It's also confirmed that Brexit stopped those preparations happening. That is from the Health Secretary at the time. So it's really this simple. Brexit killed people. We just don't know how many. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.